Now, with the Republican trifecta of the White House, the Senate, and the U.S. House, courts are playing an integral role right now at standing up to President Trump's executive orders and actions. So I called in some support today. I am joined by my good friend, Congressman Johnny Olszewski from the 2nd Congressional District, and Devin Ambrace, who is the Senior Director of Courts and Legal Policy at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, to explain the critical role that courts are playing at this moment in time. And it's today's episode of Sarah Explains It All. Devin, my first question to you is, there's been a flurry of activity. It's almost hard to keep up with. I think that's the strategy to flood the zone from this administration. Can you give us a few examples of some of the executive orders and actions that have taken place and how the courts have responded? What are the major pieces here?
So I think there are really 3 big cases that are pending. There is the complete federal funding freeze, which is based on 2 EOs cutting off all of the funding for the Infrastructure Act and the Jobs Act, and also all foreign federal funding. And there's also an OMB order, Office of Management and Budget, which is currently being run by a guy by the name of Russ Vought, who is a key architect of Project 2025, which, if you remember, Donald Trump ran away from Project 2025 like it was the plague during the campaign, because as it turns out, it is. So that's one of them. The other case is the rescission of birthright citizenship, which is a clear violation of the 14th Amendment. And the other one is the effort to basically fire anybody in federal government that he wants to in violation of the Constitution and several statutes. It's really a bureaucratic coup, if you will, in how he's going about trying to rewrite everything that America has stood for the past 2 centuries by putting a veil of fighting corruption on it, because there's not a lot of corruption going on. There's just a lot of accusations of it.
So if we could dig in just a little bit, the federal funding freeze, when it was first announced, and there was a memo that was rescinded and another memo, all very confusing, particularly for our constituents and across this country. A lot of nonprofits that are delivering essential, in some cases, life-saving services for our communities. These are all moving pieces, obviously. Can you tell us just a quick, as of today, Monday afternoon, the status of these court cases?
Well, the status of the court cases is several federal judges have put a freeze on the funding freezes, as it were, and the administration doesn't quite seem to be paying attention to it, because there's reports coming in from all over the country that Head Start programs can't draw down their payrolls. So kids can't go to preschool. Community health centers that serve poor people and children are not able to operate because there's still funding being cut off by the federal government. We've heard a number of stories come in from around the world, like some doctors in South Sudan who said, we either have to defy the president's orders or let 100 babies and toddlers die because these cuts are omnibus. They cut across everything. There's no picking and choosing. They're just shutting off the spigot entirely. And today, a federal judge in Rhode Island said, hey, federal government, you need to turn everything back on. We have evidence that you are not abiding by these court orders. So we already see the Trump administration flouting these court orders, flouting the judges who they say they revere. And we have people like Vice President J.D. Vance running around saying the administration doesn't have to follow court orders anymore. And I can promise you that he is a Yale educated lawyer, and if he wrote that down on a common law test, his professor would fail him in a heartbeat.
His 9th grade American government teacher would.
I was really happy with my fantastic state school education after this weekend, I gotta tell you. And I'm not an attorney, but the words arbitrary and capricious have been floating around in my head. It feels like the strategy here is just arbitrary and capricious.
Which for lay people means BS.
Technical term. Well, Devin, thanks for all the work that you're leading. Sarah, thanks for including me today. I know that in addition to the conversation we've already had, we're hearing a lot from our constituents about concerns over the privacy of their data and the fact that Elon Musk and his Doge team are scouring the federal bureaucracy and really trying to gain access to some of the most sensitive data that's out there, data that is usually protected by high standards. We were at Social Security just earlier today, pushing back against any takeover of those systems, and learned about all the protections in place and how people have agree not to touch that unless they have a specific reason to be doing so. Congresswoman and I both co-sponsored the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, and we're hopeful that is something that is common sense and should be bipartisan to help be clear about the fact that we shouldn't have this data be so readily available to folks who've had no vetting and no real oversight. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of the courts in helping to keep our citizens' data safe?
Sure. What we've already seen is the courts enter one order precluding Doge and Elon Musk's 25-year-old apparatchiks, we're going to go with apparatchiks, from being able to access your data. They supposedly have read-only data. But the question is, in the decades and decades that this law has been in place to protect all of our data from being basically sold, one of Elon's people was fired from his job at a company where they also hired criminal hackers because he was a leak threat. And these are the people that they're bringing in to access all of our data. So it's really up to the courts.
Devin, I've heard from so many constituents on this platform, on my cell phone, email, phone calls to the office, asking what Congress can do, but also asking what they can do at home to support the efforts in the courts, to learn more, to somehow to try to fight back from some of these issues. Can you give any advice to our viewers at home?
There are so many things that we can do individually. And part of that, I think, is something that we've lost over the course of the last couple of years, especially over COVID, and that's building community. It's telling people, finding people to share your story with in person, going to meetings, going to school board meetings, county council, city council, getting involved personally, and organizing your friends and family. Having your friends from out of state who may not have members of Congress that are supportive of your ideals, sharing your experience with them. Get them to get involved as well. And the biggest thing is, all of these federal agencies that are being taken over are also public and often open to comment from the public. And they should be hearing from you all as well. So I think we need to get back to understanding that the people who believe in America and want it to succeed and understand that the rule of law is vital to a modern functional society, we are now the silent majority, and we need to band together to make sure that our voices are heard.
Exactly, and so what's really important, I think, is clearly communicating what we know, and I've said this many times, I'll say it again. As members of Congress, the White House is not giving us any secret memos describing any of their actions. We learned about most things the way that you do, but we do need your help. So all of our colleagues need to hear from their constituents across this country. I think it's a really important way for everybody to lean in. Certainly, we're strong believers. I come from a state senate where I was an appropriator. Oversight, accountability, auditing, all really important tools for government to self-exercise on itself, but that's not what's happening here. And I think we all need to take a moment and realize that this is extraordinary what is going on. Johnny and I are going to do everything we can in our capacity in Congress as members of the minority party, fight with every tool that we have, but we also need your help too.
Yeah, look, I think it's safe to say we welcome the conversation about, is there waste? Is there efficiency? I don't think there's a ton, to your point earlier, but to the extent it exists, let's go after it. Let's root it out. There is a well-established process that has been, it is not only a democratic norm, but it is literally the structures of how our founding fathers created.
Well, I think that's an important point, because if we're talking about fighting waste, fraud, and abuse, one of the first things that President Trump did when he came into office was fire all of the watchdogs, apolitical people who have been working for years and who actually audit federal agencies and say, hey, here is waste, hey, here is fraud, here is abuse. They report to Congress, they report to the agencies, and they take steps to fix it. Fired them all right off the bat. And if
in defiance of a law that requires notification to Congress and a reason.
And if Doge was serious about fighting waste, fraud, and abuse, they'd be looking at obsolete regulations. They'd be bringing in forensic accountants. Instead, the best we can tell is there's a dozen former Tesla interns who now have the keys to the kingdom. And none of them have, as far as I can tell, have yet gotten any type of security clearance to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's particularly alarming. And so we're going to continue to do everything we can. Please follow along. As Devin said, many of these cases are before the courts literally as we are filming this. So by the time we post, something will have changed. But really important we have that check and balance. That third branch of government is playing a crucial, critical role here. So Devin, thank you for being on. Thank you for your work. And stay tuned for more Sarah Explains It All.